It's noon Central Time here in beautiful Dallas-Fort Worth area, and good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone. And welcome to ASA's Webinar Wednesday. Today's presentation is going to be brought to us with Scott Brown of Diagnostic Network. It's titled Diagnostic Challenges, Vehicles of Today and the World Around Us. Scott will be discussing the service challenges facilities face today and how to be better equipped to address them. As the vehicle technology stack continues to grow, we as professional service providers need to do everything to stay on top of service challenges and be ready for what's to come. Today, Scott will talk about new knowledge about current technologies operating on vehicles today and what's coming down the road, some case studies using modern tools and equipment that can help today's technician increase his technical knowledge to service the cars more efficiently, and his wealth of knowledge about where we are and kind of where we're going. At this point, I'd like to welcome Scott.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate this.
Well, we're happy that you could join us. Again, the Webinar Wednesday is brought to you by ASA. My name is Tony Mala. I'm the Vice President of Industry Relations here for ASA. And before we get started, I'd like to go over some tips for an optimal webinar experience. If you've never joined us before, you've joined this webinar in listen-only mode, which means you are on mute. For those who have dialed in by phone, please be sure to select telephone and enter your audio pin in the audio panel to eliminate any echo. We're also going to be taking questions today. If you look at your control panel to the right, you'll see a box that says questions. And to the right, there's a little box with an arrow pointing to the upper left-hand corner. If you click on that, it will undock that questions window and it'll make it bigger so it's easier for you to see and type into. Please, during today's session, please feel free to submit any questions in the chat window. We'll try to address as many as we can. And again, just to submit a question, simply type it into the pane. So without further ado, again, I'd like to reintroduce Mr. Brown to give us the lowdown on diagnostic challenges of vehicles of today and the world around us. Take it away, Scott.
All right, thank you. Thanks again, everybody, for showing up here. And for those that are watching this replay, we're going to talk about some interesting things here that I have been eyeing for some time now. And, as a technician and as a shop owner, I see a number of things happening around us that, give me pause. And really, I'm hoping I can share enough knowledge here with everyone so that they can come away with something that they can take back and apply. So, the topic, as Tony said, diagnostic challenges and this world around us. When did it get so complex? I'm trying to advance the screen and it's not advancing. There we go. Okay. So, the world around us is pretty complex. Some of us started way back, I started in the early 80s, and the vehicle technology has basically evolved quite a bit from where we were back then. We were just introducing computers back then into the automobiles, and that seemed highly complex. But now we look back at that technology, and that's pretty simple. I don't know why it's going backwards. Let's see. Here we go. So we've got vehicle technology to take us into the next challenge, but we also have consumers that present challenges as well, and we also have communication challenges. We need to know where to get information, how to communicate that information, and so on. And we're going to talk about that. And then ultimately, we need to get compensated for what we're doing. We are providing some exceptional services to very complex systems. And, frankly, I know a lot of technicians out there that just don't get compensated for what they're doing or what they're bringing to the table. And a lot of that is, of course, management related. So if you look at these two images here, you see the one on the left, I'm sure there's some in the audience that started their career learning how to use an instrument like that. It's an analog scope with analog meters. And if you look on the right, you can see that there's some testing going on there some more advanced, in-cylinder pressure transducer type testing and what have you. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So this number here, this 150 million, in 2016, Ford Motor Company unveiled their new F-150 at the SEMA show in Las Vegas. And that 150 million number, that represented the lines of code running on that automobile. So you can imagine in 2015 or 2016, that's quite remarkable. There are other vehicles, I'm sure that there are BMWs and Mercedes out there that run a lot more code than that, but the point here is that these vehicles, that presents a lot of complex challenges. And, when a manufacturer builds an automobile and they build test plans around every failure, do you think they can cover every failure that can possibly happen, especially as that vehicle ages and gets into its, 8th or 10th or 15th year? Again, bringing us challenges that we've really got to overcome. And we've got to, increase our situational awareness everywhere we possibly can by staying updated. We've got to grab information. We need to we need to attend training. And training is one of the things that I think is not really looked at hard. If you look at the return on investment that you get from training, a lot of that training, returns perpetual value because that technician now is sharper and able to apply those knowledge pieces to the challenges that come through the service bay. One of the big things I think that's going to have a big impact on us and is affecting us today is the levels of automation or autonomous vehicle technology that's coming at us. SAE has this, they have the J standard, J3016. You can go out there on the internet and get this chart here, but there are 6 levels, level 0 through 5. And I think all technicians should look at this and understand what's going on with the levels of automation that are now impacting automobiles and where we're headed. There is a lot of misinformation out there, or a lot of misinterpretation of what these vehicles can and can't do. But ultimately, the vehicle driver is responsible for that safe operation of that vehicle, regardless of what these systems are doing. I think, in my personal opinion, I think we're a ways away from seeing level 4 and 5 actually operating in our space. But we've got vehicles that are level 0 and 1, and some 2s that are actually rolling through our service bays today. And so there are service incidences that we need to pay attention to make sure that we're returning the proper service to that vehicle so that we're not causing any ill effects on those systems. But taking a look back at history, this is a picture that I took at the GM Heritage Center up in Detroit area. And this is a 1956 Firebird 2 experimental car. And it was at the 1956 Motorama event, and that was a GM event that they basically were showing off new technology or new things out there. And they traveled around the country. And in that particular year, they actually had about a little over 2 million people go through this Motorama event. Well, this particular vehicle, it actually had the capability to drive without a driver. And it would drive around the GM Tech Center, and it was following wires that were embedded in the road. So think back, 1956, they were already thinking about a lot of this self-drive stuff, which is just amazing. A couple of other things here that I see, these vehicles that are coming into the market. They're being advertised to consumers. It's attracting consumers to buy these vehicles and this technology. And this is where I think a lot of the misinterpretation is taking place. If you read, this is just a screenshot from a commercial that was on TV, and down at the bottom, the fine print, Pro Pilot Assist cannot prevent collisions. It's the driver's responsibility to be in control of the vehicle at all times. Always monitor traffic conditions. And it says system operates only when lane markings are detected. You think about that statement and the layers of legal that went through, that's quite profound. So what I'm trying to say here is that these systems aren't always going to work perfectly, and it's your job to make sure that whatever service you're doing to the vehicle is not affecting that system where you're putting the vehicle back into service. Another case here, Ford Co-Pilot Assist, it says this is all supplemental and it does not replace the driver's attention. So talking a little bit about technology and really what's operating on the vehicle. This is a Tesla, talking about Tesla, and this is old news. We're talking about the NVIDIA drive processor that's embedded in the vehicle. It can bring in up to 12 camera inputs, and it's running what's called a multi-layer neural network. I want to talk just a little bit about neural networks. You may or may not have heard of that before, but this is what they're doing is they're trying to model out how the human brain works. These neural networks, these layers of neurons that they're using, do not in any way have nearly the number of neurons that a human has. Human actually has 800 million to a billion neurons in their brain, and if you think about how we process information and make decisions and rationalize and everything else, that is a pretty tall order to make a machine operate the way that we do. So, but what I wanted to talk about here is that the processing power that's going on here, Tesla wasn't happy with that. And if we go to the next screen here, this is something that they unveiled a couple months ago at what was called the Autonomy Day. And if you go on YouTube and look up Tesla Autonomy Day, it's 3 hours worth of video presentations from engineers talking about all the technology that's going through that system. It's well worth to watch. I watched it a couple of times, but these are just a few takeaways. 2 terabytes per second bandwidth. That's how much data they can process. The processing power in this new controller that they're putting in this vehicle is 21 times greater than their current solution that's running out there in the marketplace. 144 trillion operations per second. And when they built this new system, they basically also said that with this system in place, it's 80% of the cost of their current solution because they're buying this pre-built box from NVIDIA. And they're also built with HDR cameras. So HDR cameras are bringing into the system a very high tonal range. And these are cameras that are actually on these other cars that we're working on too, Nissans and Toyotas or what have you. They've got HDR type cameras in place. But talking about neural networks, this is nothing new. Toyota's been using neural networks to operate their air conditioning, climate control systems. This is a look at the inside of a controller on a Jeep vehicle. Back in the day, we have speed density, where you've got like a surface layer that looks like this, where you would have basic points of manifold pressure and engine RPM to predict what that cylinder fill is. Well, if you look at this neural network, they are using training layers, and they are only using 6 neurons to operate this. See the 6 right there? 6 neurons. Remember, we have 800 million or so in our brains. So 6 to do all of this processing and predict the cylinder air charge at every operating condition. So reason I'm bringing this up is because things aren't always working like they used to. So you need to always think about staying up to date and having knowledge on how the engineers are trying to achieve their tasks. So one of the things that I see in our shop, we have challenges with consumers, and some are knowledgeable and many are not. And this I see as a big opportunity for us to transfer some knowledge into that customer. And when that customer gets knowledge by coming into the shop through a repair visit, you are gaining credibility and you're building trust with that customer. And also you're changing that customer experience. So what I'm getting at here is that you are delivering an experience that is going to have that customer coming back for more. The information that they have access to now is tremendous. So they have access to the internet. They can do all their own research, but again, they can also end up with misinformation. So you need to. What I'm recommending is that everyone needs to stay at the top of their game and be as knowledgeable as possible, and manage their expectations. Right. So making sure that they understand how their system works. Back on the self-drive type systems or these driver assistance systems, these customers are buying vehicles and they're getting put into that seat and they're driving away. And I don't think they're getting trained on how they work. So having understanding of how these systems operate so that you can help your customers understand that, again, will build credibility. So one of the things that we can do is increase our our communications. We can really enhance the way that we communicate with customers and help to educate and illustrate what is actually happening with their vehicle. Well, we're doing a lot of communication via digital nowadays. Almost everything is happening in digital space, but we have to not forget about the analog. It's everything you touch, feel. You come into your business, your customers come in and they're looking around. They may look at a service bay or what have you. You need to think about how that customer is seeing your service facility, and how that instills trust in them in dropping their vehicle off and getting proper service. And then there's a lot of social activity. So having some deep thought on how you conduct yourself socially, how your business is presented socially, you really need to look at that and make sure that you're communicating properly. Because again, this is another way for your consumer to, or your potential customer to discover who you are and what you're doing. Your shop is producing a lot of content that could be used for educating. So, as maybe you're writing up just a little piece about a failure or something that happened on a car and you're sharing that to your social, you're educating not only your current customers, but also others that would potentially come to your business and patronize you. So on the communications, I found this on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, and I'm going, or that was probably about a year ago, going through LinkedIn, and I see this and I'm going, oh my gosh, this guy's advertising. He's showing how they're doing these communication pieces for the dealers. And I read this and I'm going, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that they are posting this inside of a dealer. So take it for what it says there, but I mean, they're advertising, they're trying to sell all kinds of stuff, claiming they're going to reap all this miles per gallon gains, and it just blows me away. So my point here is that when you are communicating, you're communicating on factual, realistic information. One of the other things that we do, a lot of guys now are doing, or a lot of shops now are doing digital inspections, which is great because that, again, applies a lot of transparency and provides an education piece here. But this isn't a real condition here that we had in our shop. This is a picture of a left rear shocker strut on a Toyota vehicle, and it is leaking, and the right side, of course, is not leaking. And we failed in this case here. We only took a picture of the leaking one. We didn't take a picture of the non-leaking one, which gives us contrast. Again, understanding how that customer is going to interpret it. You'll see the picture on the right. That was just basically a screenshot out of the factory service information on the stages of leakage and what's acceptable and how the OEM calls that out. These two documents together, if that was presented to the customer, that would have helped us sell that product. On the other side of this, that customer ended up going to another shop and they looked at it and they said there's nothing wrong with it. So now we look like we're deficient. And if we would have had all of this communication piece in place, I think that we would have come out a lot better on that. But again, these are the types of communication pieces that you can apply and help with building trust and knowledge with your clients. Again, here's another example of taking a picture so that a customer kind of understands where things are at, or as a service advisor is trying to illustrate what's going on. You can see that there's a catalytic converter there on the left. You can see that there's the engine oil filter right there. This is the side of the engine, and there's your leakage. So when you're taking a picture, you need to make sure that you're taking a nice clear picture so that the customer understands where this might be on the vehicle, and understand that that's not a good situation. Here's another case. We do a lot of service work, so cabin air filters, when we go to inspect them, a lot of times we'll pull it out so we can take the picture around the vehicle so the customer can now recognize the vehicle. I'm sure the customer can recognize all those scrubs across the left bumper there, and of course you've got the license plate in in view there. So all of these things I think are going to help us to get compensated from the consumer because we're delivering more value. In some cases, cars are not exhibiting extreme drivability problems when, say, the mill is on. There may be multiple faults because that customer, sees the mill come on, they sense how their vehicle's running, and they go, oh, it's not too bad. They wait 6 months to bring it in, and by that time it may have multiple DTCs. And when you get done fixing it, the customer probably, the only thing they're going to notice usually is just that the light is out. But if you're communicating factual information and test data and showing them along the way, they're going to feel a little bit better about paying for their services. So proper documentation goes a long ways towards bringing that message forward. And also the visuals are huge. I mean, you can write a whole book and story, but people don't like to read. So if you can do it in a visual or even video, I mean, most technicians now have a smartphone, and taking a small little short video and along with a little description, that will go a long ways towards instilling that information and knowledge. And a lot of times, explaining what it is or what's going on, some technicians have trouble doing that. So you may need to work with a system in your shop where, technicians telling part of this or telling the story, and then maybe you've got the service advisor that's kind of cleaning up the story so that it's properly articulated. And especially if you're communicating this externally, where it might get republished elsewhere, maybe social, what have you. So, grammar. Diagramming of sentences and all that, those are all important things that we really need to be paying attention to, especially as technicians, as we communicate to our clients who are paying us to do service work. So talking about some of the services that are going on, again, I started way back in the day and working on carburetors and stuff, and we hardly see those anymore. And some of the young guys that are here, they'd never even worked on a car with a distributor with the points or a carburetor or what have you. So tools of the trade, we get challenges, and I'm sure that you guys get the same, where you got a car that comes in and you've got an intermittent complaint. And this is an actual case study. We had a customer come in who was an Uber driver, and he rolls up, and we've done some service work for him in the past, and he rolls up and he's leaving his car running out there, and he says, hey, I'm afraid to shut this off because it's about every seventh time it won't start, and it just crank won't start. So he said, can you look at it? So we brought it in, and my tech started checking it, and he basically shut it off, restarted it several times, checked it for codes, no codes. We're looking it over, and we really can't duplicate it, and the customer's standing there waiting. And I suggested that we take a look at the fuel pump, because we looked at the mileage. The car had over 100,000 miles on it, and so we took a current ramp of the fuel pump startup here with a scope and a current probe, and it took us about 10 minutes to, if that, to acquire this. So we immediately looked at this pattern here, and I looked, and you can see each of those ramps there represent the commutator push, or the bar, when we have current flow through the armature, and that's what's pushing it. So we looked at that and we said, hey, you know what? It's likely that that momentarily, or at times, that those brushes are stopping right on that low spot there, and that's when he goes to key up, they can't spin the pump up. And so we took this image, we explained to the customer, we explained to him how the system works, what the pump looked like, and what the probability was, because we couldn't, confirm 100% that this indeed was causing his problem. We said, hey, this here is indicating a failure. Here's what it's going to cost to put this pump in. This is what we're recommending. We cannot guarantee that that's going to solve the problem, but we did. We put the pump in, and we did the job and sent the guy down the road. He reported back, in a few weeks, and he said this car is working fine. And we've seen him since, and that was his actual cause. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've seen this type of situation happen before, where you just return the customer, return it back, problem not found. And in this case, this extra step here helped us confirm or raise the probability of that being a failure. So there we won. This is another case where we kind of got our butts kicked on this, and we basically kind of overlooked the initial piece. And again, sometimes this is indicative of a kind of a fast-paced environment where you're trying to get through the diagnosis so you can sell something. And this customer came in, it had it had random misfire DTCs, and we looked at the freeze frame, and we had a huge fuel trend split. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. That's kind of like there's something happening with one half of the engine and not the other, or what have you. So this is a V6, and we're looking at the misfire, and we did a compression check here, and this is with using a pico scope, pico diagnostics, and we put a transducer in one of the cylinders, the one you can get to up in the front, and we do this relative compression check. So we're doing one cylinder, and then it's matching up all the others. And so we were referencing number 6. Well, we can see, we looked at 183 and 156 on number 2, 183 on all the others. So we thought, well, that's not too bad, But if you look at the pressure waveform, which isn't always shown by default, you have to actually turn that up and see it. Well, if you look at this in-cylinder waveform, and for those of you that haven't done this before, this will show you the value of actually doing this. If you look in the center of that, each of those spikes there, that represents 2 rotations of the crankshaft. So that's 1 engine cycle. That midpoint right there, that's another TDC event, but what's going on there? You've got the exhaust valve and the intake valve opening and closing at the same time. So that's your overlap period. There should not be a pressure spike there. And basically what we ultimately found out there is that the timing of the camshaft, exhaust camshaft on the front bank actually jumped a tooth at one point because something was going on with the tensioner, but it jumped 1 tooth advanced. And that's what was causing that problem. That was what was causing all the fuel trim issues and so on. So again, this is a kind of an advanced technique that is not typically posted in a service manual on direction, but this is another way technicians can use to find or validate issues that are going on with the vehicle. Again, the in-cylinder transducer stuff, there's a lot of training organizations out there that are distributing really good knowledge on this, and this is something that you need to practice on good cars so that you know what a bad car is going to look like when it shows up. Here's another one, and this is a video, and I'm just going to talk through it. You won't have any sound here, but in this case here, this car was towed in, and it had some pretty bad engine noises in it, and it was low on oil, so we put some oil in it and ran it, and it was making some horrendous noises. And I decided, hey, you know what? I want to hook up. I've got, again, this picoscope has an NVH tool with a microphone in it. And so you can bring the microphone in and reference, you can see the yellow probe that's at the back of the engine. That's actually referencing, I believe it's a number 1 fuel injector. So we have some reference of time. And so we ran the vehicle and with the scope hooked up, and so we're doing that, and we come back to the scope, and you can see the rhythm here. So the bottom, the yellow trace, there's the injector, and you see the rhythm going up there in the top trace. That's from the microphone, and the noise is weird. It would come in, and then it would go, then it would come in, and it would go, and then it would come in with a heavy knock. So there were multiple noises, and so it was kind of interesting. But we didn't end up fixing this car. But the thing is that when we look at this data, if you were going in there to do repairs, you would have some point of reference on what else to look for as you're doing disassembly. So you now can understand where something might be happening in relationship to the rotation of that engine. So I thought that was pretty interesting to share. And thinking back in the old days when we disassembled trying to look for engine noises and stuff, if we had a tool like this, that would have been golden. So I want to shift over to service information a little bit. A couple of things here I want to highlight. Where is the most valuable and the quickest and easiest piece of service information to get? that is the owner's manual. That owner's manual is golden. And unfortunately, sometimes, or a lot of times, I think that's the most unread novel of all times. Consumers do not typically read the owner's manual. We had a car in here the other day that a customer came in to have the key fob batteries replaced, and we started looking at it, and we tried to look up in service information, and we couldn't find anything in there on that. We went and grabbed the owner's manual, and it had it clear as day on how to change the batteries. So in this here, I'm looking more at the driver assistance stuff, because again, you're going to be able to use. I'm going to recommend that you use the owner's manual to your advantage here, and looking at how the system works, because the last thing you want to do is start working on an automobile or trying to address a problem that is operating as designed, where maybe it doesn't actually always operate like the customer thinks. So you can see here, lane keep assist, or lane LCA. I can't remember what the heck. There's so many different acronyms here. So it display may not come on when passing a vehicle quickly. Down at the bottom here, may not alert the driver to vehicles in the next lane over. The system does not need to be serviced. So again, you may find yourself in a situation where you have maybe did some work on a car, and customer comes back complaining that now the system isn't working quite right. Don't waste your time. Make sure that you look at the service, the owner's manual, and identify how that system is supposed to work and whether or not you actually have a problem or not. Um, this is again, I've looked. All of these screens basically came off the internet. So a lot of the manufacturers now, you can go right to their website and look for the owner's manual and pull them down. These serve as great communication tools, as your front office is exchanging knowledge with the customer. So you see that you see on this one here, it says LCA does not alert the driver to vehicles outside the detection zones. Okay, so explaining the detection zones to the customer here, there's a graphic right inside of that system, so that the customer understands where the side blind zone alert is, and lane change alert detection zones are. Again, service information out of the owner's manual, highly valuable. Here's another one, adaptive cruise control. And again, some of you guys probably don't drive cars with these systems, but I would highly recommend that you get familiar with some of these systems. Maybe your shop might want to spend some time looking at your fleet that you're servicing, and maybe renting a car or two that have some of these other features on them, so you guys can get some seat time inside these vehicles and understand how they work and how they behave. Because there's going to come a day when the customer is going to come in asking for service on these systems, and we need to be, or in my opinion, we need to be experts on these systems and understand how they work and how to properly address and service them. But if you look at the adaptive cruise control, what does it say right here? Read this entire section before using the system. How many customers are just hopping behind the seat and engaging this system and figuring it out as they go? Very dangerous. It's frightening if you start to think about that. Here's out of the service information. This is out of ALLDATA on a 2015 Suburban. Talking about the forward range sensor. Now, usually, that sensor might need to get replaced or serviced or something if it's in a collision. Some of you guys may be mechanical shops that do work for collision centers or what have you, and you may be faced with servicing one of these systems. But the thing I wanted to point out here is that down at the bottom, it says performance of the ACC system may be degraded after the cruise control vehicle distance sensor module is replaced. So you replace it, you calibrate it or whatever, and it says normal vehicle driving will correct the performance of the ACC system. Very important. So, the technician's going to take it out and drive it, but it's probably going to take a number of drive cycles, driving events in different environments for that thing to fine tune. So again, this is something that needs to be communicated back to the consumer so that they understand that behavior may be degraded, and it's the way it's designed is to improve over time moving forward. Again, these communication pieces can go a long ways towards building trust and knowledge, instilled into the customer. Here's one that sometimes when you read things and again you're going very very quickly, things can you know I guess terminology can blend together. And so if you look, I've got this one part circle, but up above this, the second bullet up, it says if the windshield was replaced, the front view camera module must be calibrated. Okay, so that's in red text, right? The front view camera module was removed and reinstalled, no action necessary. Okay, and then you go down to following the replacement of the windshield. Do not reprogram the front view camera module only when the windshield is replaced unless directed by a service procedure. Okay, so you look at that and you go, well, wait a minute. It's up here. It says that you must calibrate, but now down here it says do not reprogram. So those are two different things, right? So you've got calibration and you've got reprogramming. Um, but I think that word is somewhat synonymous out there. And so, I've had guys tell me, hey, I'm supposed to recalibrate or reprogram, and they think they're talking about the same thing, but they're talking about two different things. So my point here is that make sure that you're clearly understanding and maybe have, double check or cross check with others. We just had a ADAS training event here in our shop, and we're going through these procedures on setting up cameras and our targets to calibrate cameras, and we're cross-checking each other. And because sometimes reading this information, it's maybe a little ambiguous, it's not really clearly descriptive. So it's a good idea to double check and make sure you understand exactly what is actually taking place here and what's needed. So last thing I want to talk about here is we're talking about Diagnostic Network. This is a company that I launched last year, back in right at the end of May of last year, and it's a online collaborative platform for primarily diagnosticians, but any service professional in the industry. And what we're trying to do there, of course, is continue to expand knowledge, increase your situational awareness, and make sure that you're prepared to repair vehicles well into the future. So diag.net is the address, and within this platform, it's all modern, responsive design. We built it with a clean sheet of paper, and it works on your tablet, your smartphone, or what have you. You're allowed to filter through different topics. We've got some search functions there, but we've also brought in a number of companies to help move our mission forward, because without people that bring the training, the service information, the tooling and equipment into the marketplace, we can't be successful. And without clear communication between those that are bringing services into the marketplace and those that are actually providing the services, having that dialogue back and forth goes a long ways towards building a positive outcome down the road. We've got a lot of video content that we've created inside that platform. There's a lot of discussion covering autonomous vehicles, a lot of electrification discussion, a lot of drivability, network communication stuff. There's a lot of network stuff in there, just on the basics of all the different networks. There was a guy from Drew Technologies that posted a series of data, very good, useful reference. So go in there and search for, all the network data. We've also got some of the video content also has some embedded data that you can download and bring into your diagnostic tools, whether it's a lab scope or a scan tool or what have you. All of that stuff is there for you to take advantage of. Again, this is some of the, in the center of the screen there, you'll see the J1850 network bus communication. This is actually from that one doc, and he's got 6 different items there that you can pull from and read the data around that and look at all the knowledge. A lot of guys are sharing case studies and what have you, but we had a new pricing structure that just went out on Monday, and you can buy a premium account with us for $49 a year. You can also join at a free level with the minimum function inside the site, but you can come on by and check it out, and see if you like what you see, and we hope to see you online. So, Tony, I've pretty much burned through all of my content there. There's my contact info. Do we have any questions?
Well, we do, and let's leave that contact info up on the screen for a minute. And I'm beginning to understand why one of the most important tools I see in technicians' boxes these days is a bottle of aspirin. Um, there's a lot changing, and the first question actually comes from Keith, and he observes that the last 3 years of automotive technology advances have surpassed the previous 20. And he asks why. Has the automobile caught up with other fields, or have we created new technology or new uses for existing technology?
Yeah, I mean, my impression there is that the consumer, one of the things I didn't have in there was a slide that someone brought this to my attention a while back. John Haywood is a MIT professor, engineer. I think he's semi-retired. Well, he's probably responsible for probably 90% of the engine technologies that are out there. Well, he had a profound statement in an interview recently, and he said, "Cars are everywhere. They're one of the most complex devices that we use every day." And if you think about that statement, it's astronaut. I mean, it's crazy. It's wonderful. But I think what's driven all this technology is the same thing that's driving your cell phone, right? It's consumer. The car is becoming part of you. It's becoming part of your life. And so these features that are being added to the car to make your life a little better, reduce your workload. A lot of this ADAS stuff has been driven by the workload. I think it's going to eventually have an impact on the collision space as well. Because if these cars are having less accidents because they're auto braking or they're alerting the driver to, hey, pay attention or what have you, that's gonna. If I was in the collision industry, I think, or service on the collision end, I would be a little concerned. But yeah, the technology is exploding, and it's going to continue to grow that way. Just look at a modern Tesla. It's absolutely amazing what's happening out there.
Hey, I'm often fascinated, when I speak to some groups, I talk about in the space of one career, and you and I are in that space right now. I do remember working on points, plugs, and condensers and carburetors and stuff like that when your ear was the most important diagnostic tool you had. But those times were much simpler back then. In the space of just 30 or 40 years, we have gone from completely mechanical systems to
Mm.
basically rolling networks. And
Yep.
let's stick on the ADAS thing for a second because that seems to be the big bugaboo in the industry right now, and everybody's focused on advanced driver assist systems. And frankly, that was one of the best explanations I've heard about why this technology is being developed. It's all aimed at the consumer. And
Mhm.
one of the questions that you may or may not be able to answer, but I'll take your best guess on this. What percentage of the vehicle fleet do you think right now has some kind of an ADAS system on it, whether the initial primitive ones or the more advanced stuff?
Well, I think a lot of them have, one of the advanced pieces is a backup camera. I think 2015 or so, I think all cars from then on have backup cameras in them. So that is a driver assistance piece. The proximity sensors, the little ultrasonics in the bumpers, a lot of cars may have those as well. So those are advanced systems. So it depends on how many different systems you're talking about, but we're exploring a lot of this right now. We're renting cars. We're down here on the weekends. We're doing research on these systems. And when I go to rent a car, sometimes it's a little tough to find the cars that actually have all that data. So that may or may not answer the question, but if you start watching, I don't usually watch a lot of TV, but I have to purposely watch commercials or watch for commercials on the car space just to kind of understand or stay up to date with how the manufacturers are trying to market their vehicles and sell their vehicles. But I see a pattern here where that is probably one of the top selling features is trying to market these advanced features. It's telling the customer, and again, I think it's misleading a little bit because they're telling the customer the car does all this magic when it really doesn't. and the driver is ultimately responsible. So I don't know what that number is, and that's not the first time I've heard it. And I've actually had that question myself, and I'm doing some research to try to come up with some figures on where that chart is growing and heading. But I think it's probably growing up and to the right. So we're going to see more and more of this stuff coming on. Also, 2022, I think 98% of the manufacturers have committed to putting automatic emergency braking on that vehicle. So that's going to be sensor fusion, right? You're going to have radar, you're going to have cameras, and then of course neural networks and so on to come up with the proper synopsis and auto brake for you. So there's a lot of technology coming at us. So be prepared.
Yeah, actually, and if past this prologue, if you think about it, how quickly did anti-lock brakes become, pretty much standard equipment on all the vehicles? It started out just as a high-end feature and electronic ignitions, that sort of thing. So within a
Hmm.
5-year span, and look, carburetors are gone. The fuel injection took over completely because it was a more precise fuel delivery system. So it's probably
Yep.
going to happen sooner than later. And again, in one career, we need to be able to deal with these things. But you talked
Yeah.
about calibration, and I think that's an important point. And your reference to the collision guys, actually, ASA represents both mechanical and collision shops, and I actually put the mechanical and the collision operations committees together when the collision folks were looking for some insight onto vehicle calibrations, because they do
Hmm.
see the latest system, somewhere in the U.S. Somebody with a 10-minute old brand new car with all the toys on it just hit a tree, and somebody
Yeah.
has to fix that. And the in some cases, the collision shops are relying on the mechanical shops to know how to do this. But we've gotten a ton of interest in calibration. In fact, we had a calibration class at our annual meeting. Um, but what do shops need to know about this sort of thing? I've heard stories where if you simply replace a broken mirror that has a camera in it, there's a calibration process you have to go through. You would reference the windshield replacement, some things that you don't think of. Is this something that you're seeing more commonly in the shop, or we will start seeing it more commonly?
Well, what we are seeing is, you know, first I would say you need to, where do you go or what do you do or what do you need? You need to follow the service information. That's the golden rule. And I'll give you a perfect example on that. Wheel alignments. Cars come in for wheel alignment. Some of them have some of these features on there. In the past, you would say, hey, the car needs a wheel alignment. We just put tires on it, needs a wheel alignment. Technician does a wheel alignment and sends it out the door. Everything's straight and all that. Well, if you look at the service information, they may call for certain procedures at the end of that process. They may tell you, oh, you've got to do a 0 point cal, or you've got to reset and then drive and relearn either the you know adaptive cruise control, radar, camera, or what have you. So it is all on the service information, and you need to be reading the latest service information because again, we're talking about software. These systems can get updated. They can get put into the marketplace. Say you got a 2015 vehicle and it may have had some updates and some changes the way that system works. And if you're relying on older service information that's not up to date, it may lead you astray. So always reference the service information. I think that there's probably there is a lot of liability here that you need to look at. And one of the things that we covered in our class, our ADAS class, is that following kind of what the FAA repairman follows when he fills out a report on what he did to service that vehicle. And at the end of every report I've ever looked at, it says, followed all the procedures. He checked for open airworthiness directives or service bulletins, recalls, or what have you, and then all systems operating as designed or all systems operating as defined in the operator handbook or the owner's manual. I think that if you're doing your due diligence and you're following all the procedures, and again, some of these systems in the service information have a drive cycle where you go out and drive and test and make sure that systems are working. In some cases, it's simply you're setting a button on the dash to turn the system on, you're turning the key off, turning it back on, making sure it's still in that same position. So you're testing for volatile memory, making sure powers are there, and then driving the car out and make sure that the behaviors are right. You're changing the adaptive or changing the following distance time element. all of those systems are defined. And so if you're putting in your service info or your repair order that, hey, you performed this step and did this and this and this to validate that it's working properly, one, that's going to instill confidence in the consumer. It's going to also illustrate the fact that you're spending time doing all these things. You're not just writing the word road test down. Again, times are changing, and we need to stay up to date. And so really what I would recommend is that you need to increase your situational awareness, right? So always try to read, always try to go out and grab that information. Don't wait for that information to come to you, because if you do, it's probably not going to land in your lap. Where to go for training? I think a lot of training is still being developed on this. There are a lot of guys out there that colleagues of mine in the marketplace. These are guys that are mobile. They're working on these systems daily. They're going to these collision centers and actually providing a solution to recalibrate or reset these systems to get them functioning properly. Again, some of these guys are actually creating training and bringing in knowledge and awareness to the marketplace as well. So um, it's an evolving challenge, and again, just stay vigilant and invest in your knowledge.
Mm. I always like to think that anyone attending our webinars walks away with one little nugget at least. And I got to tell you, the nugget about the service manual struck me. Or the owner's manual had never occurred to me, even though I tell consumers all the time, first thing you want to do is read the owner's manual. There is some key information there for professionals as well. But staying with the training thing for a second, I know you get this question a lot. Everybody does. And Jonathan asks, how many hours of training do you think is needed to keep up these days?
Uh, as much that's going to make you a highly competent technician. Do you feel comfortable when you come into the shop? And are you ready for challenges to come your way? Are you dreading certain things that are coming in and going to cause you grief because you're going to have to spend a bunch of time researching? So, we have no standard requirements in our profession here, which is a shame. And that's a whole nother subject. But look at the sophistication of these vehicles, as Keith asked before. The technology has grown in the last 3 years. These systems are demanding high level, high competency in the service department, and so technicians are going to need to have a higher skill set moving forward, and they're going to run into things where the service manual is not going to help them diagnose whatever that particular problem is on the vehicle. They're going to need to think outside the box. They're going to need to acquire new skills in training. And so, there are companies out there. Again, a lot of our partners that we have at Diagnostic Network are providing training and knowledge. One of them is the Future Tech Auto guys. They are teaching some outside the box stuff, where they're building little diagnostic. They're programming a little Arduino unit to actually log data and run tests and all that. Very fascinating stuff, and I think it's playing right to where that puck is going to land here in the next, between now and the next 5 to 10 years. How much training? It's whatever it takes to make you comfortable and competent and successful. So that's what it's all about. We want to make sure that everybody's successful. And the only way to bring success is to have a high level of knowledge and capabilities and tooling and equipment. So that's all I've got.
Well, that's a much more complete answer than I usually give, which is probably more than you're doing now. Okay.
Yeah.
We just keeping up with the dynamics that we're dealing with now, the changing structure of the vehicle, what it means to be a service technician, and what it means to be a repair shop, are questions that we wrestle with, at meetings and conferences and everything else. Your example of finding the camshaft problem is a great one, where you had a mechanical issue actually at the end of
Hmm.
the day, but you found it using electronic diagnostics. And I think one
Yeah.
of the challenges shops still face with their customers is explaining, the time involved and the skill set involved, and what it takes to develop those two things, which goes into your cost of doing business. A lot of shops come to us and ask, well, how do I charge for diagnostic time? You do, because you explain to your customers exactly what it is you're doing, and the more complete an explanation you have, the more comfortable they're going to be with it. But I think today's consumer is much more educated than ever before for the reasons that you mentioned, the access to the internet, et cetera. But they're also
Mhm.
being conditioned in several interesting ways. And one of the things I've noticed is when you open a hood these days, what you generally see is another hood. The
Mhm.
message clearly is don't touch this. And I think even millennials are more inclined to use professionals to take care of this stuff than do it themselves in many cases. But they require explanations, they require details. So the information
Yep.
you shared about improving communication skills, I think, is just as key as developing those diagnostic challenges or diagnostic skills that we talk about. But
Yeah. And one of the other things that
go
I'd like
ahead.
to chime in on
Yeah,
is that
please. That's why we're here.
there is a, again, we see this all the time, and our industry is sometimes they're pivoting. People are pivoting against each other, and you see a lot of miscommunication out there that kind of misleads or establishes unrealistic expectations. But you still see that message out there that, oh, all you got to do is plug it in. Come on by. We'll plug in the computer and tell you what, give you a free diagnosis. Well, you know that that's not the case. That's not the reality, and still takes that human intelligence and technician skills and capability. But these are the things that we need to counter. We need to basically communicate at a high level with our customers to make them understand that no, they need to actually spend time. On the diagnostic end, though, I mean, it's coming down to, it mirrors similar to what they do when you go into the doctor, right? They run a series of tests, or they order a test, and then they look at the results, and then they order another test. You may not see the billing on that, but they're billing for every step and procedure along the way. That may be something that you need to look at your operation internally and say, you know what, maybe we need to sell this initial thing, and then maybe we need to do some additional, maybe fuel system analysis testing. And then each of those, as you're documenting and showing, you're adding value to that. And the consumer, when they walk away after paying, five, $800, $900 for whatever it was, they feel a little better about what they did because they can see that they got a lot of value or a lot of knowledge and a lot of attention put forth in the vehicle. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there that have seen the same thing that I've seen. We've had customers come in here that have been to multiple places, spent countless numbers of dollars, and had all kinds of parts thrown at the vehicle, and it still is broken, and it shows up here. We do the diagnosis, we find the broken wire or the loose ground or whatever. And if they would have just come to us in the first place, they could have saved tons and tons of money. But again, that's one of the challenges that we're faced with today. It's the information and knowledge that consumers have access to. Some of that information can lead them in the wrong direction, and it's unfortunately it's our job to make sure that we're communicating properly and instilling that confidence and gaining their trust, so that that customer is a continuous client and brings their vehicle back and hopefully refers their friends and colleagues as well.
Well, amen to that. And I'm looking at the clock. We there's a ton of questions here, Scott. If you don't mind, what we're going to do
Okay.
is share the questions we have with you via email.
Okay.
And
All
if
right.
you have a chance, you can get back to these individuals directly. Some were
Sure.
asking philosophical questions about where we're going and things like the legislative implications of things like cybersecurity. So I'm sure they would appreciate your feedback, and I'm sure they'll have questions for you about getting more involved with diagnostic networks. So Scott, I want to thank you again. Great presentation.
Hey, thank you, Tony. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to share this knowledge and information, and I look forward to doing it again if you want to do it again. Thank you.
I'm going to take you up on that, brother. We already discussed that. Scott will be back, everybody. We have known each other since, what did Chris Chesney say? Since God was a teenager. So I was one of the one of the initial members of the original IATN as well. So Scott and I have known each other for a while. We will definitely have him back for more in-depth knowledge and insights. So again, thanks again, Scott. It was great.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks, everybody.
Moving forward, we talked about cybersecurity as luck would have it. We want to thank you for joining us today. Next time, September 18th from noon to 1 p.m. Central, we're going to be having a presentation on cybersecurity 101 for shop owners. Sunil Patel, CEO of TechMetric, will be here to explain to you how to protect your shop when it comes to technology and cybersecurity issues. In this webinar, you'll learn the basics of a shop's internet security, firewalls, and how to protect your data, best practices involved in securing your network, and differences between cloud-based versus locally installed shop management systems, and the pros and cons of each. You know, most common security holes existing in repair shops today, we're going to take a look at where they are and what we can do about them. So again, registration is now open at asashop.org/webinars. Please join us for Cybersecurity 101 on Wednesday, September 18th. I also want to remind all of our friends in the Detroit, or more to the point, the Troy area and surrounding states, that ASA will be having our 6th annual Technology and Telematics Forum on September 12th in Troy, Michigan. We're partnering with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers to bring you the Technology and Telematics Forum, one comprehensive day designed to bring you face-to-face with the industry leaders and innovators who can help bring this topic home. Forum will address questions by industry leaders, innovators, including what's at stake for repairers with these new technologies, what are current data access and cybersecurity solutions, and how can I apply this information to my shop today. Registration is now open at members.asashop.org/events. Please feel free to join us at the annual Technology and Telematics Forum. You do not need to be a member to attend, but if you are not a current member of ASA, we also encourage you to consider joining the largest association representing independent repair shops in the industry. As you can see, there's a lot of benefits of being part of the organization. This presentation from Scott is just one of them. Members have access to a whole host of information, and I'll get into that in just a second. But if you're an ASA shop and you're thinking about improving your communication skills, as Scott had mentioned, with your customers, know that we have an ASA app now, ASA on the go. It's give you an insight into industry news, find a shop feature that your customers can use if you're a member, keep you up on industry events, and even some tech tips. And the great news is you can actually engage with ASA to have your own app built by the folks that produce the ASA app on the go. You can check it out on either Google Play or Apple stores. Just search for Automotive Service Association. It is free to download. Again, I want to remind everybody that you've been listening to Diagnostic Challenges, Vehicles of Today and the World Around Us with Scott Brown. A recorded session of the webinar will be available soon to ASA members only. Again, if you're not a member, this is a great reason to do so. We have a library of information that is accessible after the fact of our webinars to members only, and there's a 5-part series there on ADAS kind of basics by one of our other manufacturer partners that'll give you a good insight into what you need to know about ADAS and what you should be brushing up on to stay abreast of that. If you're thinking about joining ASA, it's simple. Go to asashop.org, or you can simply call 817-514-2901 and we'll be happy to help. Again, you've been listening to ASA Webinar Wednesday. Scott, again, thank you. It's been a ball. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great, thank you.
And everyone, have a great day. Thank you for joining us. We have a great week, have a great weekend, and we will look for you next month. Take care.